Thousands of people are looking for asylum in Mexico. With the threat of gang violence and deportation, we ask whether the country really is a safe haven. I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is Latin America's refugee crisis. El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. 3 nations in the top 5 of a list that nobody wants to be on, one with the highest murder rates in the world. Thousands of people in those countries have been left with no choice but to flee. Many of them would like to be in the United States. But as the Trump administration cracks down on undocumented immigrants, Mexico is becoming more than just a transit route, more a destination for asylum seekers. Possibly that seems counterintuitive because Mexico itself is plagued by gang violence stemming from a drug war that's raged for more than a decade. Randolph Nogel traveled to Mexico's border with Guatemala to see if Central America's most vulnerable are finding the safety they so desperately seek.
The Suchiate River is a vital artery, not only for goods, but also for people. The river forms the border between Guatemala and Mexico and serves as a major crossing point for migrants and refugees headed north. Some have escaped gang violence, endemic to much of Central America. Many cross into Mexico with only what they can carry. But for those seeking asylum, the river is the silver lining in a journey fraught with danger and the gateway to a new life. Yesenia is just 18 years old, but her childhood is a distant memory. She grew up in San Miguel in El Salvador, a stronghold of one of the region's most notorious criminal gangs, the Mara Salvatrucha, better known as MS-13. Their influence stretches across the northern triangle, formed by Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Their criminal activity is widely varied, but their motto is simple: kill, rape, control.
Controla mucho la 13, la Mara MS. Pandilleros, los meros jefes, los que controlan la mera Mara, son las que abusan de las menores. Las chavas que le gustan, ellos agarran como rehenes a una de sus familias para tenerlas a ellas como mujeres.
Yesenia knows from experience. She had 2 children with a member of MS-13, the first when she was just 14 years old.
Me obligaron a hacer. Amenazaron a mi mamá que si yo no me acompañaba con el papá de mis nenes, pues mataban a mi mamá. Entonces, yo por mi mamá hice y soporté bastantes cosas por la seguridad de mi familia.
Her entire family moved to Guatemala after the father of her children was killed by a rival gang known as the Mara 18, or simply 18.
Que ya lo mataron, ya está muerto. Mató a una familia de la Mara 18. Entonces ellos quieren hacer venganza, que familia contra familia.
Yesenia's children are in hiding with their parents in Guatemala. She says she's trying to join her 2 older sisters in the Mexican city of Veracruz.
Solo lo único que tengo son a mis hijos y no quiero que ellos corran riesgos por el papá. Por eso los traje para Guatemala. Yo no puedo estar en Guatemala primero que nada porque El Salvador con Guatemala se unen y de El Salvador se han venido muchos mareros para Guatemala.
Across this river is where the most dangerous part of Yesenia's journey begins. She has to cross nearly 1,000 kilometers, avoiding multiple checkpoints before she can join her 2 sisters in Veracruz. But seeking asylum in Mexico isn't easy. Human rights groups say that migrants and refugees who settle in Mexico face acute risks, including kidnapping, murder, and sexual assault. And an estimated 99% of crimes against migrants in Mexico go uninvestigated.
Mexican authorities and government, they don't care the human rights situation, even talking about their own people, Mexican people. And of course, they don't care about Central American people.
Despite that, Mexico has seen a spike in asylum applications from 2,000 in 2014 to 14,000 last year. Mexico was once widely regarded as a transit country, but that's changed in recent years. And with the staunch border policies of the Trump administration in the US, More Central American asylum seekers appear to be turning to Mexico for refuge.
Por eso es que desde la llegada del presidente Donald Trump hemos visto, se ha visto a México como un país de destino. Por supuesto, México ha sido un país que siempre nos ha colaborado, que nos ha apoyado y que muchas personas ven oportunidades en México y han querido estar a quedarse acá.
Alfonso is one of them. He left his home in San Pedro Sula in Honduras. It's one of the most violent cities in the world that's not technically a war zone.
Vengo de un país, como se dice, donde la vida no vale nada.
Alfonso's brother is in the Mara 18 gang.
Tienes que hacer el número. Una X viene siendo un 10, una B un 5 y un 3 viene siendo 18.
Alfonso left to escape the violence. He spends his days helping ferry people across the river. He says he plans to stay.
Yo no pienso en el sueño americano, lo que pienso solamente es estar en un lugar tranquilo. Y a mí me parece que México, como dice cualquier centroamericano, como México no hay dos.
The Trump administration has pushed for Mexico to accept more migrants and even accept a safe third country status. The policy would require migrants entering Mexico to seek protection there.
Considering Mexico like a safe country in terms of international protection is absurd. Between 300,000 and 400,000 people has crossed this border to arrive to Mexico every year, and every year between 100 and 200,000 people are detained and finally deported. However, only a few thousand, between 2,000, 3,000, they get protection as refugees in Mexico. So we believe Mexico is not at all a country prepared to receive and protect refugees.
Weak institutions are the main reason many critics say Mexico is unsuitable for asylum seekers, in addition to widespread violence. I spoke with a people smuggler known as a coyote about the risks migrants face. He asked us not to show his face.
El caminar por caminos de extravío es riesgoso. Hay muchos asaltantes, se dedican a asaltarlos, violar mujeres. Han habido muchos homicidios. Es muy riesgoso el que un inmigrante venga sin una guía. Es meterse a ciegas a una selva.
Even the border cities like Tapachula have become dangerous as gangs from Central American countries are being forced north by heavy-handed policing.
El gobierno de El Salvador y Honduras están bastante drásticos y han habido ocasiones en que los desaparecen. Las mismas autoridades agarran a los pandilleros y los matan, los entierran o los desaparecen. Eso es lo que hace que delincuentes vengan y piensen que así como es en su país, así pueden venir a delinquir acá.
The danger for Yesenia is even greater because she's a woman traveling alone.
El asilo político sí lo voy a pedir, pero lo voy a pedir directamente en Veracruz, ya cuando esté con mis hermanas. Pues si lo pido aquí en Tapachula, Chiapas, hay mucha mara MS en el Parque Tapachula, en Comar, ya muchos mareros, entonces corro mucho peligro que hayan mareros de El Salvador, a mí me buscan.
Mexican immigration officials have caught Yesenia and deported her twice before. She hopes this time she makes it to her sisters and builds a new life where she and her children can feel safe.
Tener una posibilidad de vivir aquí en México y no correr mucho peligro, o sea, olvidarme de Guatemala y olvidarme de El Salvador y iniciar una nueva vida acá en México.
Let's go to our panel now. In Mexico City, we have two guests. Gretchen Cunha is director of the Institute for Women in Migration. John Ackerman is also there in the Mexican capital. He's a law professor and editor-in-chief of the Mexican Law Review. And in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Mike Vigil joins us. He led international operations for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Mike spent more than a decade in Mexico. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us on the Newsmakers. Gretchen, under refugee conventions, people are given protection if they're persecuted because they belong to a specific social group, particularly a minority religion, or if they're targeted by their government. By that definition alone, is Mexico doing anything wrong by deporting, since 2014, more than 500,000 Central Americans?
Yes, the problem with the situation in Mexico is not so much the law. The refugee law is fine. It agrees with the convention. Mexico has ratified the convention. The issue is that Mexico detains and deports Central Americans without any due process, and the information about how to apply for asylum in Mexico is often unavailable to them. So Mexico has a good refugee system on paper, but the application is severely lacking. The organization that's in charge of adjudicating asylum applications in Mexico, the COMAR, it only has 3 offices in the whole country and about 27 protection officers, whereas they have 52 detention centers and over 6,000 immigration agents. And so there's a big discrepancy between the amount of protection that can be given to asylum seekers in Mexico and the ability of Mexico to detain and deport people.
Mike, that narrow, rather narrow definition that I've just given, it doesn't take into consideration the fact that in Latin America, criminal gangs are often working directly with police and politicians. Can you give us some examples of what you saw during your experience in Mexico in this regard?
Well, the problem with Mexico is that you have endemic corruption. So you have a lot of collusion there between security forces of that country to some of the most powerful and violent drug trafficking consortiums that operate in that country. Apart from that, when these tens of thousands of migrants come in from the Northern Triangle, consisting of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, they go from the frying pan into the fire because probably about 2/3 of them are subjected to violence in Mexico. 1/3 of the women that go into Mexico suffer from sexual assault. So you have a country where 12 of the most violent cities of the 50 most violent in the world exist in Mexico. You have a lot of the government officials that also abuse these migrants. The cartels abduct 20,000 of these migrants every year, and they put them into the sex slave trade, into forced labor. They extort them, they kidnap them, and then they hold them for ransom, and those that don't pay are sometimes killed. So it's a horrific situation. And then when you combine the brutal Trump policies of separating individuals' kids from their families, these people are in a crush of a political maelstrom that is a horrific situation. But Mexico is acting as a surrogate, if you will, of the Trump policies. But Mexico is very unsuitable for these immigrants to seek asylum.
Gretchen, this violence that Mike is talking about, do you meet many migrants and refugees who regret coming to Mexico looking for a safer place to live?
Well, a lot of people, especially from Central America, are coming to Mexico to seek asylum in Mexico. They have family members and networks in the United States. They're in danger. They're fleeing for their lives, often with their families since 2014. And they're really trying to reach the United States because that's where they have better support. However, a lot of them get stuck in Mexico or end up requesting asylum in Mexico because of all of the violence and extortion and all of the things that were just described. And so what we find is that it's not that they regret it, because maybe they're in a shelter in Mexico, maybe they can get refugee status in Mexico, but issues like where am I going to work, how am I going to get access to education for my children, how am I going to have access to health services, all of those issues are very difficult for asylum seekers and refugees in Mexico.
John, those numbers are staggering, aren't they? Since 2014, more than 500,000 Central Americans deported from Mexico. Last year, 82,000. And since 2015, Mexico has deported more Central Americans annually than U.S. authorities have done. How is it such a big problem for Mexico?
Yeah, I think my colleagues are absolutely correct. The two big problems are corruption. The Mexican government is, up till now, been very much in cahoots with rings of organized crime. And on the other hand, there has been a terrible, servile attitude to Washington, United States. Our last few administrations in Mexico have basically been, acting as surrogates, as an extension of the U.S. Border control down to the southern border with Central America. And so, that's why Mexico is deporting so many Central Americans and sort of doing the dirty work for the United States. The shame here is, as Gretchen mentioned, we actually do have excellent migration laws on the books in Mexico. They're very progressive, very humanitarian. They dictate to the Mexican government sort of a need to support the migrants as they pass through the United States. It's not a repressive law. It's trying to actually support requests for asylum. But in the end, the politics coming down through Washington and passed right through the Mexican government has been, basically repression, control, and jailing and criminalizing these migrants. Now, there's a hope for this to change. Of course, we just had a big president's election, July 1st. A new administration is coming in on December 1st, and is trying to explore different options. So as to have a more humanitarian approach from Mexico and a more brotherly, sisterly attitude towards Central America. So that does bring in some hope for the future.
Well, we'll come on to AMLO in a few minutes, but what you say about the Mexican state supporting and understanding it needs to support people who come into the country, the numbers don't bear that out, though, do they? Because if 82,000 people were deported just from Central America alone back to their homelands, 14,000 applications for asylum were processed last year. So that means what, roughly out of the 100,000 that came to ask for asylum, officially asked for asylum, only 14,000 were allowed to stay.
Exactly. Yeah. No. I mean, the laws are great, but the implementation is terrible. Mexico, is under a lot of pressure from the United States to push back the migrants to their homeland instead of allowing for a more humanitarian transition toward the United States or within Mexico itself. And so that has been the problem precisely. We've been from Mexico expelling tens of thousands of Central American migrants and doing the work for Washington. That's what needs to change.
Mike, what, in your experience, again, with the Mexican authorities when you were living there and directing these operations for the DEA, how were they dealing with the situation of people using, either Mexicans themselves or other Central Americans, using the country as a transit route to the United States? Were they complying with American demands and desires that be curtailed? Or was it almost a case of, yeah, great, we don't want you in our country, so go to North America, go further north into the United States?
Well, the issue is that we created the violence in the Northern Triangle because in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we deported a lot of gang members, particularly out of Southern California, the MS-13. We sent them back to the Northern Triangle. They proliferated like locusts and started to create tremendous violence. But make no mistake about it, Donald Trump labels these migrants as murderers, rapists, drug traffickers. These are very decent people seeking to escape horrific violence, looking for a better way of life. And the Trump administration has turned them away, has brutally repressed the asylum laws, separated children from their parents, which I think is thuggish, and is now pushing Mexico to follow suit. And I'm hoping that when Andrés Manuel López Obrador comes into power on December the 1st, he changes Mexico's deportation laws, the asylum laws, because they are anemic. And it's not humanitarian to take these tens of thousands of migrants and kick them back to their country where they face death. They could ostensibly be killed. Mexico, along with the United States, is a country of immigrants. And these immigrants play a huge role in the economy of the United States. Donald Trump says that they take jobs away from U.S. citizens. That is a bald-faced lie. These are individuals that come in and do jobs that Americans don't want to do. They pay about $63 billion. They paid $63 billion during the last decade and have received absolutely no benefits from that money. So there's a lot of falsehoods being propagated by the Trump administration, and I find that completely deplorable.
Okay,
and
Mike.
It goes to show the racist policies.
Okay, if you don't mind, just to John, you mentioned AMLO, incoming president. The pressure from the United States is intense, and President Trump, as everybody knows, is using NAFTA and its potential future as a way to beat Mexico, to do something about immigrants coming north from Mexico into the United States. What is AMLO going to do? What is the best he can do, and can he deliver on that best?
Well, López Obrador has been very clear about what his policy is going to be. It's going to be a humanitarian policy in favor of development, right? So he's actually, in the initial stages, gotten along with Trump, surprisingly. López Obrador said he agrees that he doesn't want to be pushing all the migrants up to the United States, but he wants to be able to create economic development in Mexico and in Central America as well, so that people have the right to stay in their communities. Have good jobs and have basic economic welfare, and not have that need to migrate. And that is the solution, not more walls or more repression. So there's a lot of hope among the Mexican people and migrant activists that López Obrador will be able to follow through with this promise. And in the end, if it's successful, we get economic development in the southern part of Mexico, particularly in Central America. This will actually solve, Trump's problem, this, racist attitude, of course. I agree absolutely with my colleague. But in the end, this would stop migration and it should satisfy Trump. So we might be able to have a kind of meeting of the minds here between two very different leaders. But in the end, being able to stop migration and increased development in Mexico and Central America would in the end be in the benefit of everybody.
Gretchen, John, Mike, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, will Imran Khan deliver on his promise to build a new Pakistan? We'll discuss how the next Prime Minister plans to confront the country's many challenges. And votes are still being counted in Mali's election, but the opposition already says it won't recognize the result. Years ago, the cricket legend Imran Khan proved himself to be a leader on the pitch. This weekend, after 22 years of the latest chapter in his life, Khan will be sworn in as Pakistan's new Prime Minister. His election shows his popularity with voters, but now the challenge will be to persuade religious extremists that he's a man worth listening to and international bankers that he's worth investing in. Khan and his PTI party will carry out a 100-day plan that includes negotiating around a contentious blasphemy law and striking a deal with the IMF. He says his party's success in governing the volatile northern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa proves he can do the same for the whole nation. Shoaib Hassan has been there to see how things are running.
He's ruled the hearts and minds of Pakistanis for more than 4 decades as cricket superstar, international celebrity, philanthropist and upstart politician. But come this weekend, Imran Khan will take oath as Pakistan's Prime Minister.
I want all of Pakistan to be united in this moment. I am thankful to God for the 22-year struggle that I started in 1996. So today, God has given me the opportunity that I have dreamt of, a dream for Pakistan. God has given me the opportunity that I can fulfill that dream.
That dream has come after a long struggle. Khan was his party's sole parliamentary representative for its first 12 years. But things changed in 2013 when the PTI won several seats in parliament and swept elections in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or KPK province. and it was re-elected last month, something no party had managed since elections were first held here more than half a century ago.
KPK is one of the most difficult provinces, not only in Pakistan, but maybe even in the world. Terrorism, security, bordering with Afghanistan. So, taking all those things into account, if Mr. Imran Khan can perform at the level that he has, build hospitals which international community has recognized, do a billion tree tsunami which the international authorities have recognized, education which internationally has been recognized. So if all these things can be attained in a difficult territory, imagine all what he can do in places like Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan.
The emphasis on fixing community services, especially health and education, is a cornerstone of Khan's party manifesto. That effort is most obvious here at the Hayatabad Medical Complex in Peshawar, once an example of government negligence and corruption.
When they came, this PTI government, they turned it around 180 degrees. Many of the doctors, we had some reservations over that.
Doctors here say the cost to patients of complicated cases, like these suffering from severe spinal conditions, could be thousands of dollars in private hospitals, but is now heavily subsidized. Another change is model police stations to improve community policing. Police officials say it's brought down complaints against officers by 80%. But many in the national media remain critical of PTI's performance in KPK province. But all that appears to have been ignored on voting day.
I voted for Imran Khan and he will win because we want change. It's been so many years and we are not getting any jobs. Those unemployed have remained unemployed. The educated have no future. Everybody's moving abroad. There is so much terrorism. The system of governance has broken down. So we now have new hope with this new candidate and this new election that change will come.
It's such sentiments that allowed Khan to focus his campaign on poor governance and rampant corruption by previous governments, particularly that of former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. But analysts say the biggest boost has come from alleged support from the country's powerful military establishment and Khan's pandering to a growing anti-minority extremist element, once fringe but now dominating the national discourse over who is fit to rule Pakistan. The key debate is Pakistan's blasphemy laws. They were inherited from the British Raj, but stricter penalties were introduced in the 1980s. They now carry the death penalty for defaming the Prophet Muhammad or life imprisonment for insulting the Quran. But activists say the laws are abused, with people falsely accused to settle personal scores or to target minorities. It also encourages people to take law into their own hands. More than 70 people have been killed after having allegations of blasphemy made against them since 1990. The last major effort to change the law was led by Salman Taseer, governor of the country's largest province, Punjab, and it ended after his own bodyguard murdered him for his stance. The killer, Mumtaz Qadri, was eventually convicted and hanged for his crime during the government of former Prime Minister and Imran Khan's arch-rival Nawaz Sharif. But it's clear from the people who visit his shrine near Islamabad that his cause lives on.
Although we are ideologically linked to Tehreek-e-Labbaik led by Khadim Rizvi, but we also want to give a chance with Imran Khan, who is increasingly pledging his allegiance to the Sufi orders.
It was Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan or TLP that was instrumental in destabilizing Sharif's government by organizing mass protests in Islamabad last year, which were backed by Khan. It was the final nail in Sharif's political coffin. His tenure ended after a court first charged and then convicted him of corruption, following revelations in the Panama Papers of undeclared investments abroad. That was Khan's main weapon in the election, the view that he's fighting for the common man against a corrupt elite that acts above the law. Well, this road leads to the palatial palace that is the Pakistani Prime Minister's residence, and his next incumbent could be Imran Khan. But Khan says he's not going to live here. He says he's not going to allow lavish government lifestyles while so many Pakistanis live below the poverty line. It's a move his critics say is calculated to ensure his grip on power, just like his alliance with the extremists. Nawaz Sharif, now in prison, tried a similar thing with the Pakistani Taliban. That ended in the infamous Army Public School massacre in Peshawar and changed public ambivalence towards the militants into outright rage. So, will Khan be able to avoid the same traps and balance his relationship with the powerful military establishment? Or could an appeasement of extremists lead to his downfall as it did with his predecessor? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers, in Islamabad.
So is Imran Khan the key to a brighter future for Pakistan? Let's discuss this with Raza Rumi in Washington. He's the editor of the Pakistani newspaper, The Daily Times. And we can go to Lahore as well because journalist and human rights activist Gul Bukhari is there for us. Thanks to both of you. Look, let's go back 22 years, shall we, Raza? Let's start with you. In all of that time, since Imran entered politics, what has he learned that's going to serve him in the best stead for this challenge of being the new PM?
Well, I'm not really sure what exactly has he learned, but definitely he has learned the art of making compromises because he had to do that in order to gain power by accepting people from other parties, by making compromises with the kind of people he shunned in politics. And I hope he's also learned a lesson from Nawaz Sharif that he has to work very closely with the military and obey them rather than be defiant and challenge them.
Interesting. He has to obey them. Gul Bukhari, what about his relationship with the army, whom so many people say were actually responsible for getting Imran Khan elected? What about that dynamic between the Prime Minister and the military?
He's their junior player. He has been singing from their hymn book for the last few years, and he's been installed as a puppet. What to say of his relationship? However, we have a history where even the most compliant PMs fall out of favor. Whether Imran Khan challenges the military on its policies or not, which we have no indication of yet, is maybe not in question. Even the most compliant PMs who were installed by the military have met with a terrible fate. And then we can talk about the rest. The mandate that primarily he has espoused and which he has been given of anti-corruption. We can talk about that. I think that should be a question under discussion.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And we have to talk about corruption, which is a problem that's plagued Pakistan, well, for at least 50 years, shall we say. The country having been founded in 1947. But you're almost setting him up for a fall. Are you basically saying that if the army withdraws its support, that is the end of his premiership?
Absolutely, because if, a person who has come completely holding or walking with on crutches of the army, the minute it pulls one rug out of his from beneath his feet, he will come crashing down. He has not come become the PM because of the vote. There are several stories in the international press on how he attained a majority. It was termed the dirtiest election ever in Pakistan. And the minute the army withdraws its support, which it will at some point in time, he will come crashing down. Absolutely.
Raza?
He can't have the people's mandate.
I think, the history in Pakistan tells us that, the powerful civil military bureaucracy has to support an elected government for it to succeed. So, in that sense, I do agree with Gul that, the military, the bureaucracy, the judges are important players in the power game. But I think it would be unfair to say that Imran Khan has been completely, elected on the crutches of the military, because he has a fair size, fair number of supporters in the urban middle classes, in the big cities. And even in the last election, he obtained, I think about 7 million votes, and this time it has more than doubled. Now, obviously, the legitimacy of these elections is a question which is still being pondered, and there are reports and investigations yet to be done to give us proper facts. But I feel that Imran Khan's biggest challenge is not so much the army or the judges, but the expectations of his supporters and in general the country, because he has been trying for 22 years to present a new kind of idea for governance and a clean set of politics. But, he had to make many compromises to get where he is today. And whether he will be able to deliver on all of those promises, especially anti-corruption promise, because that is what a lot of middle classes in Pakistan want to happen. They want everyday corruption to end and the top people to be held accountable. So that's a question which remains to be seen. I mean, to be honest, I do wish him luck because the challenges before him are huge, not just in terms of the huge expectations, but also the economic crisis that the country is going through, and also a very large opposition in the parliament and in the provincial assemblies. And, how he navigates this, whether he acts like a statesman and takes all the political parties along or does a solo flight, remains to be seen. But I do emphasize, I was in Pakistan when the elections were taking place. And, there are many, many people, especially in the urban areas, who have been looking forward to Imran's victory, or at least wanting Imran to give a chance.
Gul, I'd like to pick up on the point that Raza was making, that you raised earlier as well, about Raza calls it the promise of clean politics from Imran Khan, the corruption in the country. Corruption takes many forms, right? Cronyism, nepotism, influence peddling, patronage, elitism. All of that is rife in Pakistan across politics, across civil society. It almost certainly pertains to the army as well. How does Imran Khan go about changing a system that's been in place for decades, a system that has forced Pakistani citizens to go and live abroad because they can't take it anymore?
Why do you even think that that is what he has set out to do?
He has said he will do that, because he has said he will do that. He said he will change the form of governance, which means that he has to change the way the government relates to people, and the people want an end to corruption. He said he'll do it.
I'm sure he has said it, and you're right, he has said it. Look at him. This man retired in 1992 from active cricket. For the last 26 years, he has no source of income that he can declare. He lives on a 300-canal mansion. His right-hand man is Jahangir Tareen, who is a convicted insider trader. He did not declare his UK mansion, this Jahangir Tareen. He did not provide any money trail. Imran Khan has not been able to answer his foreign funding of the party case. He has challenged the Election Commission of Pakistan, telling it that it has no jurisdiction to open up or review or reveal his party funding and bank accounts. And he's done that for the last 4 years. Then you come to the rest of his governance for the past 5 years. Each one of his nominees today as Prime Minister-elect, whether they be Governor of KP or Governor of Punjab or Governor of Sindh or Chief Ministers that he's nominating, they are all tainted with corruption cases. How do you even begin to think that this man was or is ever going to, has an aim of wiping out corruption. His only aim was to become Pakistan's prime minister, and that's it.
Raza, the allegations that Gul is putting against Imran Khan, do you think they would all be ignored by the majority of the population if the new prime minister could meet the economic challenges of the country? And what are those challenges?
So I think, first of all, the allegations that Gul is leveling, I mean, they are out there in the public domain. These cases have been taken to the courts, so various levels of courts, but there definitely has been little progress on that front. Partly, I'll tell you, one of the reasons, other than the fact that, there's an impression that Imran may have been favored by the powers that be, but also because he has never held a public office. So the ordinary folk on the street in Pakistan says, well, why should we apply the same yardstick or the same measure because he has never been in power? That's what they say. So I'm not saying I'm endorsing it or not, but there definitely is a proclivity to forgive Imran Khan for all these, gaps or these lapses. But having said that, the economic crisis is pretty deep in the sense that for the past 1 year, Pakistan has been plunged into a politically unstable phase, and which led to the free fall of the rupee. It lost almost 20 to 25% of its value, and it's making a comeback now. At the same time, we have a big balance of payments crisis. There are billions of dollars to be paid as debt servicing. And for that purpose, the Imran Khan's finance minister designate has already announced that they would go to the IMF and seek a bailout package. At the same time, Pakistan has been aided by China, by Saudi, and Saudi Arabia will also chip in, and the Islamic Development Bank is likely to support. So in the short term, Imran Khan will, his government would take care of that and pull the country out of the immediate economic sort of crisis. But the real problem would be because Imran Khan has promised two things. One, he has promised that he would curb corruption in the country, which is a long-term problem and needs a long-term solution. Second, he wants to create what he calls an Islamic welfare state, patterned after the state of Medina during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And now the question really is that you can't set up a welfare state without lots of money for public expenditure and spending.
Okay.
And
Raza, we have run out of time, but we really appreciate you joining us on the Newsmakers, and equally thanks to you, Boubacar. Thank you very much indeed.
These results are results of a fraud, of a shameful stuffing of ballot boxes to favor the outgoing president. These are the results of serious irregularities and deliberate violations of the electoral law. These are manipulated results. We won't accept them. We won't accept them.
Before officials could even finish counting the votes, Mali's opposition had already rejected the outcome of Sunday's presidential runoff, and it called for supporters to take to the streets. Apart from being accused of ballot stuffing, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita has raised eyebrows by claiming an early victory. The poll took place under the threat of attack by militant groups, something many believe led to the extremely low turnout. But despite all of that, African Union and European observers say the election was largely fair. So, does the opposition have a case? Let's go to Washington and speak to Alex Boucher. She is an assistant research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Alex Boucher, thank you for joining us. Does indeed the opposition have a case? But how dangerous is it that Soumaila Cisse is asking for people to come onto the streets and rise up?
That's clearly a concern when the observers have so far said that the irregularities, if there were any, were small in number and and that it remains to be seen what the result of the election actually is. I think that if the opposition is concerned about the results, it should follow legal and constitutional processes for contesting the results of the elections once they are known.
If the first round was anything to go by in terms of the results gained by the two who made it into the runoff, Keita and Cisse, it was almost a formality that Keita would win this second term. What was the problem with the opposition out of those more than 20 candidates that stood in the first round and were then knocked out in that first round? Why couldn't they coalesce around Cisse?
That's a very good question. It seems that that they could not come to an agreement as to, as you say, coalescing around him, and that has been a challenge for the opposition. I think another issue has been that, as you just said, there was this feeling, perhaps, that given Ibeka's result in the first round, that the second round might be a foregone conclusion. And we saw also with the low rate of participation, even lower than it was in the first round, that Malian citizens just didn't seem very interested in participating in the vote.
Tell us about the biggest problems that Mali faces.
Well, I think that those are numerous. Clearly, the security concerns, in particular in the center and the north of the region, where various, on one hand, various Islamist groups, and on the other, various militias that try to protect citizens' interest, whether they are concern land tenure or other issues. Those security concerns, I think, are of course paramount. But another big concern has been, of course, reconciliation among the different Malian groups following the crisis of 2012 and 2013. That process has made some progress, but not as much progress as I think many Malian citizens would like. And continuing that reconciliation process is clearly going to be one of the major concerns of the new administration, or Ibeka's second administration, if he's declared the winner.
The economic disparity between the elite, most of whom live in the capital, Bamako, and the rest of the country is extremely acute. There's almost a geographical split between Bamako and the rest of the country as well. How can Boubacar Keita, if he is indeed declared the winner, or Soumaïla Cisse, if there's some sort of dispute and he ends up being declared the new president, how can either man really resolve issues that date back so long into the past?
I think one of the first steps will clearly be to take the steps that are mandated in the Algiers peace agreement, which has, as I said, has not yet happened. So I think that'll be a first step. But second will be to, I think, go to the population and find out from them what their major concerns are and how they can be addressed. The presence of the state needs to be extended to the center and to the north of the country, and that has improved but not yet completely happened. And when the state does extend its presence to those areas, it needs to behave in an accountable and fair fashion towards all of its citizens, and extending that presence is also going to present a challenge.
Corruption is said to be rife. It's led to huge disillusionment amongst so many of the electorate. Turnout, according to the Mali Citizen Observation Pool, was just 27%. That's got to be one of the lowest percentages of turnout of any election in the world. Does it just show that people don't trust the politicians, that they don't care for them, and that they don't believe that they'll deliver anything for the people?
Well, turnout in Malian elections has historically been low. The highest turnout we saw, I think, in the last 3 elections was actually the elections in 2013, when turnout for the presidential election was about just under 50%, if memory serves. And turnout, as we saw in the first round this time, was a little bit lower than that. But as I said, turnout in Mali has historically been low. So so clearly, you know, the security issues and the sort of disinterest of Malian citizens continues to be a problem. But I think in terms of the corruption, one of the perhaps encouraging signs that we see is that in two recent rounds of surveys that Afrobarometer conducted, the number of Malians who said that the government is accountable rose by about 25 points. But on the flip side of that, the percentage of Malians who said that the government was effective dropped by about 20 points. So we can see there that that Malian citizens are more aware of the corruption that pervades their political system, but they feel that the government has not yet taken enough steps to do something about it.
Alex Boucher, thank you very much indeed for your time. We appreciate you joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, still no reunions for hundreds of children separated from their families at the US-Mexico border. We look at the impact of Donald Trump's controversial immigration policies. Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.